Former President Evo Morales, representatives of trade union and social movements denounced new destabilization attempts in Bolivia. Guatemala enters the 11th day of anti-government demonstrations. An international expert panel on climate change warned about the effects of human activity and said the changes will be reversible for centuries or millenniums. Hello, welcome to From the South. I am Ray Gomez from teleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. Bolivian social movements declared the state of emergency after a week of constant protests in the lead-up to the country's Independence Day. Meeting at the Union Federation of Bolivian Mine Workers headquarters, alongside former President Evo Morales, representatives of trade union and social movements denounced destabilization attempts in the country. They committed to defend the democratically elected government of President Luis Arce and his Vice President David Choquehuanca. Evo Morales expressed great concern about the threats of the new coup by the far right of the country, similar to the one carried out in 2019 against him, and warned of the ongoing threats to democracy.
15 social movements are present here. We convoke you, thanks to the deep sentiment of the Bolivian people, to express our enormous concern about the new threats to democracy and above all to our cultural democratic revolution.
In response, Bolivian social movements declared themselves to be in a state of emergency.
To defend the democratically elected government of our constitutional president, Luis Arce Catacora, and our vice president, David Choquehuanca. For all the above, the workers and our social movements of the Bolivian people declare ourselves in a state of emergency, and we will be vigilant against any attempt at destabilization that might be established in the country.
We say to the coup plotters who say that they have recipes to overthrow governments, we say from here, the social movement are not going to allow it. Today we are more united than ever to defend the democracy that we have recovered after the coup d'etat.
More than 3.5 million people participated on Sunday in the open primary elections of the United Socialist Party of Venezuela to choose their candidates for regional elections. President Nicolas Maduro confirmed the installation of the electoral polls in the more than 5,000 polling stations at a national level, which were insufficient for the massive turnout. The Electoral Commission confirmed the voting process was held peacefully. The party's first vice president, Diosdado Cabello, stated that the large participation of voters shows the people's support to the Bolivarian revolution and the government. On November 21st, Venezuela will elect 23 governors and 333 mayors, as well as legislative and municipality council members. President Maduro reacted in his Twitter account after the massive turnout in the primary election. He wrote, "My acknowledgements to all candidates and pre-candidates. You've made an exemplary campaign. The call now is for unity to advance together, accomplishing the revolutionary commitment of becoming one united force that reaches victory in the mega elections of the coming November 21st. Dr. Fernando Casado described as surprising the high turnout of the Venezuelan people in the Socialist United Party's primaries, despite this stabilizing attempts in Western countries.
But this is one more grain of sand within the different types of democracy mechanisms that exist in Venezuela. And once again, it is clear that we are in a pandemic, a country in economic war, and a country that the Western countries are trying to physically suffocate. Well, it is quite commendable that yesterday there was a democratic process in which there was a very large participation and surprising turnout.
Dr. Casado also emphasized that the democratic process on Sunday contributes to dismantle the international campaigns created against Venezuela.
But of course what happened yesterday destroys the stereotype that the media is constantly trying to build, that Venezuela is a bankrupt country, that Venezuela is a violent country, that Venezuela is not a democratic country. All those stereotypes are being dismantled. Well, they are being dismantled continuously, but I think that yesterday in a primary election, in an election that in reality was focused on seeing who the candidates of one of the parties were going to be, and giving once more a lesson in free representative democracy, because it is an open primary election. In Spain, for example, we do not have one. Well, I think it gives a lesson of democracy to all those who are paying attention to what happens in Venezuela.
The Sunday new massacre was reported in Colombian department of Putumayo. This is the 65th registered in the country so far this year. The victims were 3 Venezuelan nationals who belonged to the same family, identified as Wilmo Johan González Escalona, Leonardo Jr. Linares Mujica, and José Gregorio Escalona Linares. So far, their assassination is contributed to the armed men in the municipalities of San Miguel and Valle del Gamones. This happens shortly after the Ombudsman's office issued the 3 early warnings in the municipality, which they say is an open confrontation between dissident factions. We stay in Colombia. The International Committee of the Red Cross expressed its concern of the forced displacement at 2,600 people in the Colombian department of Bolivia. The institution called on the armed groups operating in the area to respect the integrity of the displaced persons and also expressed concern about the degradation of the conflict in the area. The entity has provided medical supplies and humanitarian aid to prevent a rebound in the coronavirus or other diseases. According to the agency, in the first 4 months of this year, 195 victims of explosive devices were registered. It also documented 33 requests to search for missing persons in the context of the armed conflict. We'll be right back after this very short break. Welcome back. This Monday, Guatemala entered the 11th day of anti-government demonstrations. Protest hotspots have been established in the capital and other regions of the country to demand the resignation of President Alejandro Yamatei and Attorney General Maria Consuelo Porras, both accused of corruption. Protesters are calling for a transitional government and a national constituent assembly. The mobilizations, estimated to have convened 200,000 people nationwide, have included broad sectors of Guatemalan society, including rural and indigenous representatives. The Taliban have captured 3 regional capitals in Afghanistan as they continue to make sweeping territorial gains in the country. These cities were Jaipur, Tagulang, and Kunduz, making it 6 provincial capitals captured in 3 days. These are the first ones to fall to the insurgency since the Biden administration announced the full withdrawal of the United States troops. Violence has escalated across the country after U.S. and other international forces began withdrawal their troops from the Asian country following 20 years of military operations. These recent Taliban attacks have killed at least 27 children and 136 other injured. The Afghan Interior Ministry spokesman commented about the security situation.
Fortunately, the security situation in Kandahar, Lashkar-Gah, and Herat provinces has improved. Afghan security forces are patrolling the cities. The enemy has suffered heavy losses and their plan to capture these cities have been neutralized. The enemy attacks in Kunduz, Sheberghan, Samangan, and Sarepul provinces are ongoing. The security forces have had resistance and advances in Kunduz and other cities. The enemy has suffered big losses. After coming under pressure, the enemy is now moving towards Masar and Pulik cities, but fortunately, the security belts are strong and the enemy has suffered casualties.
After a year of his electoral victory, President of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, highlighted the unity and resistance of the people in the face of the sanctions and the destabilization campaign promoted by the West. The head of state pointed out that Belarus passed the test of national unity. Lukashenko also spoke about the virtues of an educated and loyal citizenship that defends the national interest and sovereignty. The president affirmed that with last year's elections, the citizens bet on the consolidation of peace in the country. Lastly, he noted that the constitutional amendments referendum, which is set for early 2022, is to be held in a climate of transparency and fairness.
We held the elections under the conditions of total transparency and democratization of political life. The difference was that some were preparing for fair and honest elections, while others were calling for a coup d'etat. No matter how difficult it was, we survived this year. It wasn't an easy one. We will withstand the years to come. We will not give up and we will never get on our knees.
Joint military drills between China and Russia began in Mali in northwest Nisha autonomous region. More than 10,000 Chinese and Russian troops joined a 5-day drill in a combined tactics training base. Beijing has described them as part of a deepening pragmatic cooperation between the two militaries. This is the fourth consecutive year that both sides have held drills of this kind. The military exercises are meant to demonstrate the two sides' resolve and capability, as well as their ability to fight terrorist forces and jointly safeguard regional peace and security. Scientists from the Cuban Finlay Institute announced that the first 25 adolescents included in the Soberana Pediatrics anti-COVID clinical trial received this Monday the dose of the Soberana Plus vaccine candidate to conclude their vaccination scheme. The groups of volunteers between 12 and 18 years old received 2 shots of the Soberana O2 vaccine candidate and the final jab, Soberana Plus. The vaccination scheme, which was conducted as part of a pediatric analysis, recently showed a 91% efficacy against the symptomatic disease. The experts are confident that by the end of August and early September, the first data from the research in pediatric ages will be available, and then the necessary documents will be submitted in order to start vaccination in that population. Health authorities emphasize that immunization against COVID-19 in children and adolescents plays a fundamental role, as it could have a very positive effect in containing the progression of this disease. Guatemala recorded more than 800 deaths due to COVID-19 in July, making it the month with the highest number of fatalities this year. Since the beginning of the pandemic, more than 10,000 deaths and more than 300,000 confirmed cases have been recorded in the country. Health authorities tallied 51 deaths on July 7th, being this the day with the highest mortality rate due to the disease. Vice Minister of Hospitals Francisca Coma pointed out that despite the worrisome situation, figures did not exceed those already recorded in June, July, and August 2020. He also asked the population to comply with biosecurity measures to avoid contagion. New restrictions came into effect from this Monday in the French capital. People are required to show a special virus pass before they can enter restaurants and cafes or travel across the country. The measure is part of a government plan to encourage more people to be vaccinated against COVID-19 to slow down a surge in infections. The highly contagious Delta variant now accounts for most cases in France. The special pass is issued to those who are vaccinated or have proof of a recent recovery from the virus or a recent negative test. The measure also applies to tourists visiting the European country. Other nations have adopted similar policies as part of the so-called new normality.
Listen, we are adapting. We were informed by numerous sources of information. We knew we had to show this and it posed no problem.
This involves putting on another cap once again. In other words, we have to ask the clients if they are permitted to have a drink at my restaurant. This is rather unusual. I must admit that in terms of ambience, this morning I didn't quite know what to expect, but on the other hand, there wasn't a big crowd. The handful who came did it right away, but I must admit, this isn't for me. It is quite unusual to ask someone to show a pass. This feels very much like being the police.
We have more stories coming up after this final short break. An international experts panel on climate change warned about the effect of human activity on the increase of extreme scenarios and said the changes will be reversible for centuries or millenniums. The report presented urge to reduce toxic emissions deeply and immediately and reaffirms climate change is no longer an unlikely situation, rather a terrifying fact. The panel has spent over 3 decades building up the study of climate change. The specialists concluded that humanity's high industrial capacity and the truly effective environment-friendly practices and regulations have led to the heating of the atmospheres, the ocean, and the earth. A version of the study was published in 2013, but the evidence has multiplied since then. Climatic events like the recent floods and heat waves that have struck in several parts of the world are a direct consequence of the spike of the overall global temperatures.
What is clear from this report is that unless there are immediate, strong, rapid and large-scale reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius will be beyond reach. The report shows that in the next 20 years, global warming, the average temperature at the Earth's surface over a period of 20 years, is expected to reach or exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius above the late 1800s.
United Nations climate experts affirmed that human responsibility for global warming is questionless as they call for a drastic reduction in greenhouse gas emissions.
The world listened, but didn't hear. The world listened, but it did not act strongly enough. And as a result, climate change is a problem that is here now. We can't undo the mistakes of the past, but this generation of political and business leaders, this generation of conscious citizens can make things right.
Have we lost the hope? No and yes. According to this report, we are still having a chance to stop the negative climate trend during the mid of this century by especially limiting the use of fossil fuels and by stopping deforestation.
But the recent changes we have seen in the climate are now widespread, rapid, and intensifying. Some of the changes we see today are unprecedented in thousands of years or never seen before.
Firefighters in Greece have gone through extreme efforts in their 7-day non-stop evacuation and contention activities trying to stop the wildfires from reaching the forest. 2 people were confirmed dead in Greece. Meanwhile, Turkey struggles with blazes of its own, with a count of 8 fatalities respectively. Dozens have been hospitalized in both nations as southern European territories swept in heat waves and battling the fire for almost 2 weeks now. Many of the disasters have been reduced or controlled in Greece. However, the wildfires in Evia Island, the second largest, does not seem near to ending. It could continue to affect human lives and property. Citizens flee the island amid fears that the blaze reaches forests and grows beyond control. On the issue, Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis addressed the nation.
The extent of the disaster, especially in Evia and Attica, blackens everyone's hearts. And I am the first one to apologize for any weaknesses. I fully understand the pain of those who watched their homes and properties burning, the frustration of those who were evacuated from their hometowns, even the anger of those seeking airborne assistance without knowing whether the firefighting aircraft were operating elsewhere or whether conditions made it possible for them to fly.
The Mexican border state of Baja California registered 21 deaths due to the highest heat death toll in recent years. According to the head of epidemiology, Oscar Zazueta Fierro, the ages of the people who have died range from 18 to 61. Zazueta Fierro also said there have been more than 300 recent cases of heat stroke. Health officials asked residents to remain hydrated and out of the sun as much as possible. In Mexico, the average temperature over the last days has been 46.1 degrees Celsius and is not expected to drop in the coming hours. The area has been hit by warmer than normal temperatures this year, at times reaching a high of 50.5 degrees Celsius. Japanese authorities ordered the evacuation of at least 300,000 inhabitants after Typhoon Lubid arrived in the southwest island of Honshu on Sunday. The gale moves across Hiroshima with strong wind gusts and torrential rains and will travel out to the eastern sea, passing by Tottori. Airlines have cancelled 63 flights due to the typhoon's arrival. Lubid hit on Thursday's eastern coast. The annual typhoon period in Asia usually lasts from May to October. This year's season is predicted to bring considerable wreckage to the Far East countries. We've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at teleSUR English. And you can also follow us on social media for all the latest news. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. Plus, you can catch up on our shows on the YouTube channel. For teleSUR English, I'm Ray Gomez. Thank you for watching.